Have you ever been so tempted by a delicious smell that you just can't resist? Well, our little friend the mouse knows exactly how that feels. In a cozy barn, tucked away from the hustle and bustle, a little mouse with a big appetite was about to embark on an adventure that would change his life. He was no ordinary mouse, mind you. His tiny size was inversely proportional to his enormous love for food. His miniature nose, often twitching with curiosity, was his guide to delightful discoveries. One day, a tantalizing aroma wafted through the air, tickling the mouse's senses. It was the smell of freshly harvested corn, golden and ripe, radiating a scent that was simply irresistible. Following the enticing aroma, our little mouse found himself before a basket brimming to the top with golden grains. His tiny eyes sparkled with delight at the sight of this grand feast. However, the entrance to this corn-filled haven was a narrow opening between the strips of the basket. It was a tight squeeze for even the tiniest creature. But our mouse, driven by his large appetite, was not one to back down from a challenge. With his eyes on the prize, he wriggled and squirmed, pushing against the strips, his tiny body straining with effort. The mouse's determination was as substantial as his appetite. He knew that a delicious feast awaited him inside the basket, and he was resolved to reach it. With every wriggle, he moved a little closer to his goal. His struggle was real, but his spirit was indefatigable. He was a tiny mouse with a mighty heart, and he wouldn't let a narrow opening stand between him and his corn-filled paradise. And so the mouse, with a belly full of determination, finally made its way into the corn-filled haven. The adventure was only beginning. Little did the mouse know the challenges that lay ahead. But for now, he was content, for he had won his first battle against the narrow opening. He was ready to feast, unaware that this indulgence would lead to a lesson he would never forget. Inside the basket, a golden feast awaited the mouse. The aroma of the corn was simply irresistible, and the mouse, with eyes wide and heart fluttering with anticipation, dove headfirst into the sea of golden kernels. The grains were plump and juicy, a testament to the bountiful harvest and the care with which they were collected. Every bite was a burst of flavor, a symphony of sweet and earthy notes that danced on the mouse's tongue. It was a feast fit for a king, and the little mouse was the sole attendee. The mouse, driven by its insatiable hunger, munched away with abandon, losing itself in the ecstasy of the feast. The little creature was so engrossed in its meal that it paid no heed to the passing of time or the rapid filling of its belly. The mouse's tiny frame began to expand, its fur stretching to accommodate the growing girth. Each kernel consumed added to its size, slowly but surely transforming the once svelte mouse into a round, chubby creature. Yet, the mouse showed no signs of slowing down. Its tiny paws continued to shovel corn into its mouth, its eyes glazed with pleasure and oblivious to its increasing size. The feast continued unabated, the mouse's desire for the golden grains overpowering any sense of restraint. The mouse was in a state of bliss, its mind foggy with the intoxicating taste of the corn. It relished each bite, savoring the flavors as they exploded in its mouth. But all good things must come to an end, and so it was with the mouse's feast. The corn was all but gone, and the mouse, satiated and content, finally paused. It surveyed the scene with a satisfied sigh, its belly round and full. The mouse was no longer the tiny creature that had squeezed into the basket. It had grown, ballooned to almost 3 times its original size, a testament to its gluttonous feast. The mouse, now round and content, decided it was time to leave the haven of corn. Little did it know, the real challenge was yet to come. But alas, leaving proved to be more difficult than entering. After a feast fit for a king, our little mouse found itself in quite the predicament. Its belly, now swollen from the corn, made the narrow opening of the basket seem even smaller. As the mouse attempted to wiggle its way back out, it found itself stuck, trapped in the basket it had so eagerly entered. It squirmed and wriggled, pushing with all its might, but to no avail. The once enticing basket had now become a prison. The mouse's tiny heart pounded with fear and discomfort as it realized the gravity of its situation. Its eyes, once filled with the gleam of temptation, were now clouded with fear and regret. Its belly, once empty and longing, was now uncomfortably full and was the reason for its entrapment. The mouse's struggle continued, its face etched with worry and its body aching from the effort. It managed to push its head through the opening, its whiskers twitching with anxiety, but the rest of its body remained firmly lodged inside the basket. Its tiny eyes darted around in panic, scanning the barn for any sign of help. Just as the mouse struggled, a wise weasel happened upon the scene. The weasel, sleek and astute, watched the mouse's predicament with a knowing look in its eyes. It had seen this situation before and knew exactly what the mouse was going through. But rather than offering help, the weasel decided to let the mouse learn a valuable lesson. From a distance, the weasel observed its tail flicking back and forth in amusement. It knew the mouse had made a mistake, and it also knew that sometimes the best way to learn is through experiencing the consequences of one's actions. And so, with a nod of its head and a twinkle in its eye, the weasel left the mouse to its fate, teaching it a lesson it would never forget. Just as the mouse struggled, a wise weasel happened upon the scene. The weasel, with a keen eye and a sharp mind, quickly grasped the predicament. With a wisdom that comes from years of observing the world, the weasel understood the mouse's situation in an instant. Its eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and pity as it addressed the plump, stuck mouse. "Well, well, well," the weasel began, its voice rich with a knowing tone. "My friend, it seems you have been indulging in a bit too much." The weasel's words filled the air, each syllable carrying a weight of truth that could not be denied. It wasn't a voice filled with sympathy, but rather one that offered a harsh yet needed reality check. The weasel continued, its words echoing around the barn. "Stuffing yourself into that basket was quite the feat, but getting out might prove to be a bit trickier." The mouse could only listen, its eyes wide as it processed the weasel's words. It was a stark reminder of the predicament it had gotten itself into, a result of its own gluttonous actions. The weasel then imparted a final piece of advice that would become the mouse's guiding light in its time of hardship. "Perhaps you should stay there until you feel just like you did when you went in. Good night, and consider it a lesson learned." The weasel's words, though seemingly harsh, were filled with wisdom, a wisdom that would help the mouse understand the consequences of its actions. The mouse could only watch as the weasel, offering no sympathy, turned to leave. It was left alone, stuck in the basket, with only the weasel's words for company. The weight of the weasel's advice slowly sank in, filling the mouse with a sense of regret and understanding. And with that, the weasel continued on its way, leaving the mouse to ponder its predicament. The mouse was left alone in the quiet barn, the weasel's words echoing in its mind. A harsh but necessary lesson learned in the face of its own gluttony. Days turned into nights, and the little mouse remained trapped in the basket. The once vibrant barn was now a quiet, haunting echo of the mouse's mistake. Each passing moment in the mouse's confinement was a poignant reminder of its gluttony. The mouse's once insatiable hunger had turned into an aching pang of regret as its belly rumbled. No longer in anticipation of food, but in remorse, the mouse was faced with the harsh reality of its actions. The discomfort within was not only physical, but also a metaphorical representation of the consequences of its indulgence. With each passing day, the mouse began to understand the wisdom in the weasel's words. It was a tough pill to swallow, but the mouse recognized that it had only itself to blame for its predicament. The basket, which once seemed like a haven of endless delight, had now become a prison, a stark symbol of its greed. As the days turned into weeks, the mouse's appetite diminished, and its round figure began to shrink. The golden kernels that once seemed so irresistible were now a bitter reminder of its folly. The mouse watched as its reflection in the basket's shiny surface gradually returned to its original size. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the mouse felt a sense of relief. Its body had returned to its original size, and the narrow opening of the basket that once held it captive was now wide enough to allow its escape. With a newfound appreciation for moderation and a pledge to never repeat its mistake, the mouse managed to squeeze itself back through the opening. The barn, once a place of temptation, now echoed with the sound of redemption. The once gluttonous mouse scampered away, carrying with it a valuable lesson on the consequences of indulgence. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but one that would stay with the mouse for the rest of its life. Remember, sometimes the most important lessons are learned in the hardest ways. And as our little mouse friend discovered, indulgence can have both physical and metaphorical consequences.